This video was brought to you in part by viewers like you. Thank you. Crosswire theory. Alright, so we all know Mr. Crosswire, that supposedly normal second-hand car dealer who's a bit too well off. We're talking limousines, a mansion with a butler, kitchen staff, 2 game rooms, and let's not forget, he owns a yacht. And it doesn't stop there. Apparently, he's wealthy enough to sponsor the Backstreet Boys. I mean, sure, second-hand car dealerships do well, but this well? Something feels off. Think about it. Not only does this man have access to luxuries beyond what any dealership earnings could afford, but he's also got his own mini Muffy museum. Yes, Muffy has her own personal archive under the house, filled with her trophies, baby photos, and probably a self-portrait or two. What sort of father funds a whole historical archive under his mansion for his child? A father who's got way too much disposable income, that's who. Then there's the way people just seem to let him get away with things. In Arthur's Perfect Christmas, Mr. Crosswire gives the Frenskys, a well-known Jewish family, a ham for the holidays. Look, maybe he didn't know, but nobody even corrects him or suggests that perhaps a different gift might be more appropriate. And in the blizzard, when everyone's rushing to get supplies, Mr. Crosswire just strolls in, takes all the bread and milk, and no one says a word. Everyone just watches him wheel away trolley loads of food, almost like they're afraid of what might happen if they speak up. And honestly, I wouldn't blame them. This guy has got connections. He's stopping Mrs. Reed at the shopping center to talk about his taxes like it's a national crisis. Sure, he could just be a bit uptight about his finances, but Mrs. Reed looks like she's heard it all before. It's almost as if Mr. Crosswire is nervous about someone digging too deep into his business. After all, it's tax evasion that got Al Capone, right? Even Muffy herself gets a similar royal treatment. In the episode where she stays over at Francine's, she's downright insufferable, bossy, demanding, rude, and yet Francine's family just puts up with it. Francine's dad could have set a few boundaries, but instead he's unusually patient, almost like he's wary of offending the Crosswires. Because if you upset Muffy, well, who knows what sort of friends her father might have on call. It's also interesting that Muffy, the heiress to a yacht and personal chefs, goes to a state school. Why not a private school for someone of her wealth? It could just be Mr. Crosswire wanting her to have a normal life, but maybe it's about keeping a low profile. With their extreme wealth, sending Muffy to private school would just draw even more attention to them, and maybe prompt a few more questions than they'd like. Besides, it's much easier to blend in as the quirky, wealthy family at a state school than at an elite academy. Finally, there's the vibe Mr. Crosswire himself gives off. Big, imposing, and impeccably dressed, he's definitely got some businessman qualities about him, but more in a Vito Corleone way than a come on down to Crosswire Motors way. You can't help but feel he's not just in the car selling business, maybe he's the head of a family business, if you catch my drift. Elwood City hierarchy theory. Alright, so let's really get into this. Elwood City's job hierarchy is, frankly, a bit suspicious. The mammals? They're living the good life, managing shops, teaching classes, attending PTA meetings, and sipping tea at the sugar bowl. But then, you have the birds and reptiles, who for some reason are stuck with all the tough jobs. Take Arthur the Unfunny, for example. Who's hauling those giant stalls across town and rolling in the Ferris wheels? Not a single mammal in sight. Instead, it's a parade of ducks sweating away while everyone else just stands around, watching like it's some kind of show. And it's not just the heavy lifting. These guys are also the ones fixing things. You need a telly repaired at the Reed household, a bird's on it, no questions asked. Lights flickering, call in the birds. It's like Elwood City collectively decided that if you have feathers or scales, you're automatically on handyman duty. What's even stranger is that no one questions it. It's like Elwood City silently agreed that if you've got feathers or scales, your job is to fix, lift, and haul. And the mammals? They're just cool with it. It's this unspoken, almost invisible line dividing who does what, and no one even thinks twice about it. Meanwhile, the birds and reptiles keep Elwood City running, holding it all together while everyone else just watches. Government experiment. Alright, here's the evidence that Mr. Ratburn's class is more like a government experiment than a regular third-year classroom. Let's start with the basics. When Mr. Ratburn's sister takes over, they're learning the 1 and 2 times tables, totally age appropriate. But the moment Ratburn returns, it's like the syllabus jumps 10 years ahead. Suddenly, these 8-year-olds are doing algebra, geometry, even calculus. Seriously, what 3rd grade student tackles calculus? It's glaringly different from other classes too. Remember this?
For tonight's homework, find 2 words that rhyme.
Tomorrow, you'll be quizzed on everything.
Tomorrow we'll put your rhymes together and make a fun song.
Mrs. Fink, what if we could only find 1 word that rhymes?
Meanwhile, Mr. Ratburn is handing out full-blown reports and projects on the Magna Carta. His class looks like a nursery on the surface, with posters of trees and chairs on the walls, but that's just a cover. This classroom's more like a lab for pushing kids to extreme academic limits. And the pace? Completely unnatural. One day they're doing multiplication tables, the next they're diving into derivatives. If this isn't a hidden experiment on young minds, then what could it possibly be? It's as if Elwood City's hiding its own advanced program, one so intense even the students have no idea they're part of it. Inside job theory. Let's start with Buster. Now, Buster Baxter is known for being one nosy rabbit. If there's something weird going on, he's the first to sniff it out. He practically lives to investigate mysteries. Mr. Haney probably realized this and knew that if Buster was around, he'd poke around and ruin his plan. So what does he do? Either he drugs Buster or messes with his alarm to make sure he stays asleep and conveniently misses the entire event. No Buster equals no accidental whistleblower, just an empty stage, perfectly set up for Haney's scheme. Then there's that other episode where Mr. Ratburn, Mr. Haney, and Mr. Morris get locked inside the school. At one point, Haney snaps, yelling,
I hate school!
Mr. Haney, he didn't mean it!
That's a pretty intense confession from the head teacher himself, and it shows he's been tired of the school for a while. While they were locked in, Haney took the opportunity to study every corner of Lakewood Elementary, learning the layout and the internal workings of the building. It's the perfect research for staging a fire later on. Now, let's talk about Arthur's Numbers nightmare. In that episode, Mr. Haney is suspiciously fixated on brochures, specifically ones for tropical destinations. And where does he end up right after the fire? Africa. It's almost like he was already planning his escape, using the insurance payout to finally leave behind the school he clearly didn't care for. The fire was just his ticket to freedom, with no questions asked. And the cherry on top? He stages the fire to look like it started from random faulty wiring, leaving no one directly to blame. But, just for good measure, he pins the blame for pulling the fire alarm on Binky. It's a sly move because Binky, known as a bit of a troublemaker at school, makes for an easy target. At home though, he's completely misunderstood, a perfect scapegoat for Haney's plot. In the end, the pieces line up almost too well. Buster mysteriously asleep, Haney's intense hatred for school, his knowledge of Lakewood's layout, his obsession with those brochures, and his sudden escape to Africa. This wasn't just a tragic accident, it was a carefully crafted plan. An inside job from start to finish, leaving Mr. Haney free to live out his days far from Lakewood Elementary, while everyone else believes it was just a case of faulty wiring. Thanks for sticking around, legends. This channel runs on your support, so if you want more theories, smash that like button right now and help me hit 10,000 likes for part 2. Every single like and subscribe means everything. I wouldn't be here without you, and you're the fuel that keeps these videos coming. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in a bit.